All right, and we're live with some of the most amazing power couple I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. I'm always thanking God, on a periodic basis of us being able to cross paths in the past, and we're just thankful that Alina and Martin from the future, down under, in the land of Australia, early morning on Friday, have decided to join us for this conversation. And we are so thankful for their passion and their ministry toward not only young adults, but church leadership and the growing together journey that is happening over in Australia. As we're beginning, let me just go ahead and give a official intro, short official intro to who they are. Let me go ahead and begin with Alina. She is the young adult director for the South Queensland Conference, if I'm not mistaken. And I first met her over at the Growing Young cohort. I believe it was 2018. And we had our first California pizza, or California kitchen pizza, however that is arranged. And we had our first meal together, got acquainted, was blessed through some of the stories that she shared with me. And we have Martin, who is giving leadership to the Celeste Group.
That's right.
I don't know how to pronounce that. Yeah. And he is the strategic consultant and giving leadership to the communications and giving much advice and counsel to senior leaders in many different organizations. And we are thankful for his expertise and his skill set that he has brought into the kingdom from the marketplace. And there's an intersection that's there. And we're going to engage in that conversation together. So without further ado, I'm going to let them, in their own words, give us a background and history of where they were born, how they grew up, their formative years, and their introduction to their Savior Jesus, and their almost exposure to the Growing Young journey. So whichever one of you want to go first, this is your time. Why don't we have Alina go first, ladies first, and then we'll have Martin go.
Sounds good, Justin. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with you today and sharing just a little part of our journey and our story. I grew up here in Australia in the state of Queensland. I grew up in a Christian family, an Adventist family. Went through school, moved away from home when I was 17 to study at university. I studied physical therapy, and I would say that move away from home for me was a real time, I think, of owning my faith. I was baptized when I was 16, really involved in, different parts of church life when I was younger. But I think that move out of home, transition into that young adult life for me was a point where I really had to own my faith and my journey with Jesus. And I look back and there was a point for me where I'd taken a gap year from my physical therapy study. I'd taken a year off and I served as a youth volunteer for a year with our youth department. And that experience for me was incredible. I think it awakened a calling that God had on my life that was beyond the limitations that I had set for myself. And I think that's when the call to ministry really started. Yeah.
During that gap year when you decided to intern, was it an internship or was it?
Okay.
An invitation came from the department itself, or you saw an ad, or you heard from somebody? How did that process work out?
It was an interesting story, actually. I'd already taken the year off and I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew that God wanted to do something different in my life that year. And so I'd taken time off with no plan. And I think I'd gone into the office to do some photocopying for some local teen ministry. And I bumped into the youth director and I told him my story about how I had the year free and didn't know where God was moving. And he said, you know what, we have been looking for a volunteer and we haven't been able to fill that volunteer internship position. Would you be interested? And from that short conversation, I would say that the course of my life shifted direction.
Wow. So it was a divine appointment through a photocopy machine.
Yeah.
When God tells you to make some copies at the conference office, you just have to obey. Man, that's amazing.
Yeah. So yeah, really
Wow.
incredible looking back on that experience now.
Okay, as the youth volunteer, can you kind of expound and tell us a little bit about what you were able to engage in, just a little bit,
Yeah.
in terms of youth and youth ministry and the scope of the work that you were exposed to?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really blessed to have quite a diverse experience. A few days of the week, I would work at one of our Adventist schools alongside the chaplaincy department. So I worked with the chaplaincy team with high school students. I was a youth leader in 2 of the local churches. So I came alongside and supported the current youth groups. And then I also worked at a conference level, helping to organise some of the bigger events, youth and young adult rallies, summer camps and that kind of thing. So it was a very broad experience from a school, local church and conference level.
Awesome. And you were continually receiving some form of mentorship and leadership from the youth director. And were you able to work with other young adult leaders, or was it just you volunteering, or was it a team or group effort?
It was a bit of both. So it was just me in the department with 2 other youth directors, but then in the local church setting, I was mixing with other young adult leaders. And so that was really incredible, getting to come alongside them and see them grow in their own leadership capacity and to really see groups activated in the local context.
Right. And that's where the love for the local church, being the hope of the world, started to grow in you. And you saw the potential of what the local church can do. That's amazing. That's amazing. So a physical therapy background, a gap year, and also a strategic, almost divine appointment for this volunteer work. What happened after that year? Did you just immediately switch majors, or go to a completely different direction, or how did that happen?
So I was ready to go into full-time ministry study after that. I was ready to quit my degree, switch my major. But it's interesting, my mentors actually encouraged me to finish what I'd started because I was halfway through. And so they encouraged me to go back and then continue to pray through it, continue to serve locally, and then invite God to open an opportunity to do some postgraduate study after I had done that. So I was reluctant to do that at first because I was just so passionate and keen to get into it. But I'm so grateful that I did that now. I went and finished my study. I had a couple of years working as a physical therapist, and I think that opportunity actually gave me a chance to really grow personally in my own walk with God, and also just in communicating with people. It was a lot of personal growth time, and I think it prepared me for when I finally got that tap on the shoulder. So, okay, it's time to go now. And that's when I went down to study theology at our college.
Yes, some mentors encourage you to finish. Man, and we're going to actually get to mentorship in a little bit and how they play a critical and important role in our lives. But that at that season of your life, you had a mentor, or maybe 2 or 3 mentors that were speaking into your life. Can you talk about how you, initiated, the mentorship? Did it happen organically, or was it something that you prayed for, or wasn't looking what happened? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. So I think, the journey initially started with that conversation at the photocopier. And so, I'd really been praying for direction. So I think that was an answer to prayer for a mentor that, I really didn't realize that I needed at the time. But from that, it really, I think, opened my eyes to the value of having older, more experienced senior people speaking into my journey. And so, from a young age, my parents have always been that for me. They were really active and involved in youth ministry in the local setting. But moving, away from that family context, that year of youth volunteering really opened that up for me. I had a couple of local pastors, a couple of youth directors. But after that official season finished, I still continued to seek them out. If I hadn't seen them in a while, I'd give them a call, or they'd give me a call, and we'd catch up for a hot drink, or I'd be over at their place for dinner, and we would just talk about life. And it started to become a pattern of time investing together.
Right. Love how God orchestrated that in your life at a critical point of juncture when you were about to make one of the greatest decisions for your life and answering the call to ministry. Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. Let's switch over to Martin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey? We'll get to how you guys met each other, but
we might look young, but there's a bit to the story. But yeah, so look, my family was a ministry family. So dad's a pastor, mum, was in ministry too. She's a midwife. So we grew up throughout Australia and spent some time in South Africa. In another time of our life, we spent some time in South Korea.
South Korea.
Represent, hey? And so I always had a heart for God. I didn't go to like a Adventist high school or anything like that. So really needed to find my own faith in many ways. I did find my local church fairly hard. There wasn't many people my age at church. And I did have, funny enough, when I was like at 16, learning to drive, like you trying to progress into your that next stage of life. My parents and I just didn't, I guess, click with driving. It was, often when you're learning something, you can, like in family encounters, it can cause some conflict. So I had someone from church who was a bit older than me, and he was probably in his early 20s, and he actually taught me how to drive, and it brought me into the youth group a lot more. And so
he took the risk of actually being in the same car with you.
Some sweet moves. So
was he like one of the leaders in the church, or was he part of the youth group?
Yeah, he was one of the, I guess, he didn't necessarily have a title, but he was one of the youth leaders.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. And so later down the track, I went to university and studied public relations, journalism, marketing, that sort of thing. And my career went into the secular world, just like everyone else. Worked for different government bodies, worked for advertising agencies, that sort of thing. And I was fairly involved with youth ministry and church and things like that. That's where we actually initially first met.
I see, the perfect place to meet. Yes.
And
so, go ahead.
I basically, my brother was involved with a motorbike accident, which fully changed my world, and our youth group was really close and tight. It was a really incredible youth group, but it really shattered to the direction of where I was heading, and I just felt really alone, and I didn't find community in the church. And so I started looking for community outside of church, and so I drifted away. And it led me down making a few grey decisions, which made heartache and those sorts of things.
Right.
And it was through that, I guess, probably about 8-year journey that I, in that process, I started my own business, marketing communications business. I got married, and that ended into a disaster, and eventually had to find God again, and and through that process, we reconnected, and I guess that's a very shortened version of a few events, but it reignited the love of God, love of His church, and just looking out for those on the margins, which I saw myself as one of them.
So you said you in the wake of a tragic event that happened with your family member, there was a you couldn't actually stay within the church structure, and you kind of drifted away because of many questions that probably arose in your mind, and maybe even doubts, and and many young adults and many people who are at college and post-college age do go through major transitions in life and often go through some of the deep struggles in their family life. And there's that difficult season that they go through. For you personally, Martin, were there anyone that reached out to you from the local church setting that checked in on you and kind of, told you that they were praying for you? Was there someone?
Look, there was people that did reach out, and it wasn't. Yeah, it didn't really cut through. I do remember like coming to church, and sitting on the outside, sitting in the back pews, or rocking up quite late, late to the service, and just feeling really alone in church. And there was quite a few times like an old deacon would spot me, and he would, come out and say, "Hey, what are you doing there?" And he would, grab me around the shoulder, and he didn't say much, but it was enough to be noticed, and enough that I felt like I could still come back to church and, find a little bit of community. So yeah, it was, believe it or not, like something as crazy as a 40, 50-year-old, ordinary bloke just looking out for me, just saying hi was enough for me to not lose total faith in our church.
Okay. There were sprinkles of interaction that kept your hope alive, and felt that if you ever returned, you'd be welcome back, that there was a community for you.
Yeah.
I'm glad that happened. Can you actually go further and tell us a little bit about how you made that return back to the local church community?
Yeah. How did it come about? I guess it wasn't, I hadn't necessarily totally disconnected in my mind, but I had, like, looking back, I had clearly disconnected, but I really sensed that I needed more, something bigger than myself in my life. And so it, like, I was committing to more reading of the scriptures and that sort of thing, but my life had really become a bit of a mess, and I knew that I couldn't do it without God. I had community that came around me, in the sense that some people just asked me if I wanted to go to lunch or dinner with them a couple of times, and just looked out for me, because like here I was like late in my 20s, or and I was, by myself. Maybe I was in early 30s. I was by myself at church, so I had no one. I felt quite alone, and I could feel my isolation. And it was something incredible to feeling like you belong. Yeah.
But something or someone led you back to church to be alone in church. There could be a lot of other places that you could have been, but it was the church that you sought. And in that place, in that setting, maybe there was some connections that were made. But I mean, to everybody that's listening, the church leaders out there, there's always those that are on a search, right? For you, you were searching for something, someone, and you were let me go there. You were pursuing your, I guess, passion toward marketing and communications, and you were giving strategic leadership in those areas. How did you find that passion, and how are you able to, I guess, pave your way? You said you even started your own business in that particular arena. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny because my family isn't totally connected to business world or anything like that. So I had heard a little bit about what public relations was when I was like in my mid-teens or something like that, and I just thought it was just incredible. I just wanted to be like, yeah, I wanted that as a career. I don't know why, but it just sounded really cool. And
I hope it was a cool experience too.
yeah, I had some really cool experiences, and it's, you know, it's one of those careers that led me into so many different industries, and yeah, like it's one of those places for me. I can't sit still too long, and it's one of those places you can try different industries and bring a skill set that is adaptable. And so, like, I progress quite rapidly within my young career, and I just got to like maybe mid-20s, early 20s, and was just like, if this is all there is to like career development and that sort of thing, I was just like, I was like reached middle management, and I was like, if this is all it is, I think I want more. And
Right.
so, like, well, I think now's the time to start my own business. And so, yeah, I started it, and it was one of the craziest experiences of my life. You know, like, I had no idea what I was doing. I shot through like emails to my immediate network and said, guys, I'm looking for just, you know, like, I've started this business, you know, have you got any work? And it literally was just, it started from there.
Yeah. Man, to actually give the listeners a background to the pinnacle in which Martin reached, right? He was the finalist for the Brisbane Lord Mayor Multicultural Entrepreneur of the Year. I mean, that's a big deal, right? As an entrepreneur. And he sat on the board of Australian Israel Chamber of Commerce. And, you know, there are many things that God has prepared Martin for, to be a instrument in the marketplace, especially in the realm of communications and marketing. And I believe those skill sets and those expertise is in desperate need for our church for such a time as this. And I wanted to know, and this is the conversation that we want to engage in the midst of this particular global pandemic and the quarantine experiences that we're all going through. And in the I guess process of trying to communicate and keep in touch and continue to empower our young people and the church leaders, how have you seen your skill sets and how God has, you know, brought you up in the past? How did that, you know, come to play and get utilized for His purposes? It doesn't have to be just this season; it could be, you know, seasons before.
Do you want me to start, and then I'll tie you in? Yeah. Okay. So for me, like, it pinnacled to a point of my life where everything had crumbled, and I was just like, I remember sitting in my car, and there was like fully hail damaged car. The storms had literally ripped apart my car, but you know, I had all of that, like all these other experiences attached to that same time, and I just remember thinking, going and crying out to God and saying, like, God, like, I'm prepared to give it my all. And you know, like, I think from that point, I really had like a different perspective, like almost a kingdom perspective, in the sense of like, I know that I've got these skills and whatever else, and like I know that I get frustrated with certain things within our church and going, oh, I could, you know, they could do this, they could do that, and then I was like, well, maybe that person is me. And so I put myself into that equation and said, yeah, I think I can play a pivotal role. Like, I'm happy to do my part.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with Martin's background in visioning and big picture, and my skills in relationships and detail, and really, I guess, executing ideas, God's really, I think, positioned us to be able to speak into our church at such a time as this, to come alongside our young adults and really encourage and challenge and inspire. And we've had the privilege of doing that in young adult ministry for the past 4 years. This is our 5th year now. And I think in this next season, there's definitely a real focus on, how can we position the local church to really rise up and be all that God's calling it to be. And this pandemic comes in an interesting time when I think we're right on the cusp of that moment, saying God is calling our church to more. And it's actually been really exciting to hear the questions that are being asked and the ideas that are being shared in this season by our pastors, our leaders, our young people, saying, we are the church. Like, the doors might be closed, everything has changed, but we can truly be the church that God is calling us to be, to reach into our communities, to be a blessing, to stay connected, to not just stick to the status quo and going through the motions of rocking up to church each weekend just for a weekend service, but to actually be the church and live that out and be a disciple who's making disciples. So I think whilst we're in a challenging season, we're also in an exciting season as well.
Yes. Wow, that was beautifully stated. And I think for such a time as this, God has given us and given you guys, especially, the different experiences and wide spectrum of vantage points in which you can bring to the table. You talked about big picture and also detail, a visionary and a manager couple. I call it power duo couple. Oftentimes, in leadership, one person had this grand vision, and if there is no one to actually carry that forth and build bridges and relationships and take care of the logistics, everything just crumbles and falls to the ground. So to see you guys actually working side by side for the kingdom work of really raising up churches that would do some serious impact to this world, it's exciting. I want to backtrack, because you were working as a youth, volunteered and answered a call to ministry, and you pastored, and somehow you landed the role on young adult ministries. So I want you to take us back to your journey of how you were introduced to young adult ministries, or is that how you began? And just kind of take us through on your journey with young adults.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was at college, it's Avondale College here in Australia.
University college?
And University College now. It's reached university.
Yes,
status,
university.
So I did a postgraduate degree there for 2 years, and my heart going down there was that I wanted to be a school chaplain. That was really my heartbeat, was working with high school aged young people. And it was interesting, during that 2-year journey down at college, God actually really did a work on my heart that enabled me to release any expectation of where he was going to send me, because I was very specific in where I thought I wanted God to place me. But I ended up surrendering it, saying, God, I'm here.
Amen.
And I'll go where you send, whether that's in a school, whether that's in a local church. Maybe I won't get picked up at all straight after, but I'll still serve you. And I'm so grateful that I was able to get to that point of surrender, to be able to just be open to where the Spirit would lead at the end of my studies. And interestingly, at the end of my studies, God actually put an invitation to be a school chaplain on the table, which was incredible. The only downside for me was, at the time, it was back in my hometown, and I had clearly said to God, I don't want to go back there. I was a young lady in my late 20s. I was, looking to get married and settle down, and I was quite convinced that my hometown, Brisbane, didn't hold that for me. But I'm so glad God has other ideas, and that I was able to give him the reins, because it was actually being back in Brisbane, working in the school environment. That's actually when Martin and I reconnected again. So I'm very grateful.
I see.
I'm going back to Brisbane.
God knew what he was doing. God knew exactly what he was doing.
That was a lesson for me there. It was like, girl, you've just got to trust him, and stop trying to figure out everything on your own. But Yeah.
So where did young adults come from?
So I worked in the school for 4 years, really predominantly focusing on that high school age group. And it was interesting. I was on the committee actually that was looking for a young adult director for our conference. The position was a new position. They were looking for someone in there. I was convinced that I was going to be in chaplaincy for the rest of my days. So it wasn't even on my radar, but they ended up extending the invitation to me to step into that role of young adult ministry. And initially I turned it down because I was just settled in a path and was really kind of at the pinnacle of my ministry and chaplaincy. But about 6 months later, the call came again. And in that moment, it was crystal clear. I just felt this was where God was calling me next. And actually, he had been positioning me for this because many of the young adults that I would be serving with coming alongside were the very same high school kids that I'd been working with for the past 4 years, both in the school setting, in the local church setting, in our summer camps and wider conference environments. So it was actually exactly where I needed to be. I'd already had relationships with a lot of these young people. And so to step into that young adult role now, it was really a matter of reconnecting with these young people. And the thing that stands out the most to me, Justin, and this is, I guess this is the heartbreaking part, this is, the pain point that really stirs and motivates, is that when I got into that young adult ministry space, a lot of those high school kids that I'd worked with before, I couldn't find them in our local churches. They weren't connected. And so that for me and for Martin as well, because that was around the season that, God had brought us together. And so we were very much a partnership in our young adult ministry season. He really set on our hearts, how can we go about bringing in the scattered? How can we gather those scattered? How can we really instill, a confidence in these young people that they are the church? That was a phrase that really spoke to us, is that we are the church. Our young adults have an incredible role to play. And so we then went on a journey of really trying to challenge and inspire our young people to step up and to be who God was calling them to be as a part of the church and his kingdom.
Right. Can you actually tell us the, I guess, the percentage of high school students that go to our schools? I don't know if you guys have that, statistic in the South Pacific and also in Australia of how many do choose to stay in the local church context and continually engage in discipleship and grow with the church, and those who just cannot make other decisions other than that. Like, do you have that ballpark figure?
Yeah, but I'll let you.
Yeah, so the figure, we don't really have specific to Adventist context, but the figure within the Australian Christian churches is 72% of teens and young people who grew up in the church basically disengage by the mid-20s in Australia. So like we could see that anecdotally, like our youth group was amazing. Like it grew really in a short period of time, and then like fast forward 5-10 years and many of them were no longer connected to church.
Okay, as you are actually realizing this new reality of the scattering that took place, and you were now given the privilege and the opportunity to lead young adult ministries, and this is an important question that I want to ask, because you had the passion to gather the scattered. Did you have a a plan in mind on how you wanted to gather the scattered, and how you would not only gather them, but properly disciple them and also connect them and plug them into the life of the local church? Like I want to hear the journey that you took to really formulate that gathering process, and then also go on to the empowerment stage. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in that first year, Justin, our focus really was who are we working with? Like, who's out there? So some of our initial initiatives were just really providing opportunity for young adults to come together and to connect with one another on a broader scale. So that first year was when we launched our first young adult conference, which was a weekend event. And the heart behind that is let's actually do it for more than just one evening or one morning. Let's make it a weekend. Let's have some time of fellowship together. And so, from that really birthed our We the Church movement, which was, really exciting. And we had some hard conversations over that weekend. We, were able to, I guess, hear the heartbeat, hear the heart cries, and the needs of our young people.
Yeah, a lot of young people were really struggling during that process, just with church, and a lot of hurt. Yeah, so it was I would say it was quite a healing process.
Yes.
Eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was the first theme of that first conference? Was it
We the Church?
Yeah, we're the church. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was really looking at, I guess, we've kind of divided it in two parts. One was like that great divide, that challenge, that struggle. And so we were able to speak into that and acknowledge some of the pain and the hurt that our young people might be feeling. But then we were able to pivot for the rest of the weekend and look at the grand design of God's church and who we are called to be as sons and daughters of Christ and his purpose for us in the body. So that weekend itself, I think, really launched us on a trajectory. And I'll be honest, Justin, when we started, I had no idea. I'd come out of chaplaincy. There was this blank slate ahead of us. There wasn't necessarily a framework behind. And so we were just really trusting the Spirit to pave the way and make the next step. But that weekend, I think, really helped us to shape where we were moving from there.
So, the first couple of years, it was really about journeying with this generation, young adults, and that sort of thing. But as we were journeying with them, we could really sense that there was some real struggles with the wider church, and so there was a lot of people who had grown up in youth group or whatever, and they were still youth, but they were in their 30s, 40s. Etc. And so they weren't graduating or they weren't transitioning to the wider body. And so we were basically went on a bit of a journey of how do we navigate this challenge? And this is where we bumped into, quite literally bumped into the resource Growing Young. And
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's get to that just in a little bit. What I want to actually tap into was that the first young adult conference of its kind in that particular region?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
it was the first time that you try to gather as many young adults as you can to launch this movement of young adults to be the church.
Yes.
And then from what I have glimpsed, and I think I heard about this particular gathering. So in your own, I guess retrospect, as you reflect on that particular conference, what do you think was the greatest impact that was given to you as the leader for the young adult ministries? What did you realize in hindsight? What was the greatest lesson that you gleaned through that conference?
I think one of the things that does stand out to me, and we were intentional about this, while we wanted, to gather that wider group, we also wanted to see who were some of those young adults that were, I guess, really committed in their local church, were maybe not having the leader of title, but were people that were wanting to, pour into their own generation. In the book Faith for Exiles, they talk about the resilient disciples.
Yes.
So we didn't have that terminology at the time, but I would say, we were on the lookout for who are those resilient disciples. And in the middle of that weekend, on the Saturday night, we hosted a dinner at a Thai restaurant and just invited anyone who, really wanted to see some change in their local church, who wanted to step up, who might consider themselves as a leader or someone who wanted to be a person of influence. And so we opened that up, and we had about 60 young adults gathered together in this Thai restaurant. And for us, this was okay, this is the start. This is some people that we can work with who are going to go back to their local and are going to have influence and are going to gather, because we could see that we and of ourselves, we can't do this. This isn't about us being the local church. This is about activating key leaders within the local church to really serve and build up their own local ministries.
To actually give the listeners the size of South Queensland Conference, this is actually 2.5 times larger than the state or the Republic of Texas. I mean, South Queensland is the republic, the mother republic of all republics. And that's the territory that they're in charge of. And they have gathered the Gideon's army of 60 young adults that were fully committed in being the church and wanting to grow as leaders. And that's where it began. And then we now transition into being exposed to the Growing Young book and the 6 core commitments in the Growing Together journey. Can you talk about your first initial introduction to either to the book or the concept or, that sort? Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, so I guess I am a trawler on social media, and I was just looking for resources in this space, because I just felt like that the conversation was very much on, especially in the young adult space, about the problem, the challenge, and just it felt to us that we were stuck there, and there wasn't a move forward, and so we were looking for resources that took responsibility, that took about that was a wider perspective, and literally it was going through like Twitter and those sorts of things, and just finding like key people within the church that had similar sorts of language, and so I came across, I think Phil Harland might have posted something. He's from Melbourne, youth director from Melbourne. I think Ben Lundquist posted something about it as well. And we didn't have strong relationships with either, but I was like, hey, Alina, this looks really interesting. This really speaks to the trajectory or vision that we were wanting to go. Let's get the resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And it came around that time where we were in that point where we were raising up a generation of young people, raising up a generation of young adults who were keen and willing and wanting to serve and wanting to engage in the local church. But we were also hitting some of those challenges of the local church, not necessarily knowing what to do. How do we actually engage in this process? And so we saw an opportunity to really speak into this space, speak into the senior leadership, speak to our pastors in our local churches. And it was around the time that we discovered the resource that we then decided we needed to host a pastors summit. We needed to get all of our pastors together and speak into this space, speak about the problem and the need, but then speak about the opportunity and the invitation to grow young, to grow together.
And this isn't something that youth ministry was ever used to doing, like calling the pastors. It was always about, the youth over here. So it was a very new territory.
Yeah, absolutely.
So previously there wasn't anything of its kind that was done. Not to mention Australia, but I think the world, where we were literally wanting to transform the local church culture to be an environment where young people can come in and ask those tough questions and get engaged and connected with the seasoned members of the church. So we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I want to talk to you about, so is that the point of time when you decided to join the cohort? Is that why you were there back in 2000, I think it was 17 or 18?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, Justin. I'll give you the brief version. So we had our pastors summit in 2017 in about May, and that's actually when we invited Ben Lundquist to come over. We loosely connected before that, but he accepted an invitation, and it was still very new for him, the whole Growing Young journey. So he spoke into that with our pastors. It was really well received. there was excitement, there was hope moving forward. And it was from that little South Queensland Pastors Summit that Ben was then invited to come back the following January to speak to all of our Australian pastors as one of the keynotes. And he was able to unpack some of the growing young principles in that time of Australian pastors getting together.
And
then from there, it was when Ben was at that Australia-wide Pastors Summit with us. He had been looking, I think he was already as a part of the cohort in the United States. I think by that stage, he was a part of it. And he said, hey, Alina, there's a summit in March. It was the final summit of the cohort journey. He said, you should come. And
was it 2 weeks after?
It was only a couple of weeks away. And I thought, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. But long story short is I ran it by our president. He said, go for it. We'll sort it out. And I was on the plane within a week. And I up and we bumped into each other at California Pizza Kitchen.
Yes. No, I mean that. So when Alan Martin introduced us, I was just like, okay, she's from where? Because I think you were probably jet lagged, and I think you just arrived on that day, and we just kind of crossed paths. It was like, did you eat? No, and we just kind of had that meal together. So I was just like, wow, this is a godsend encounter. And I believe there was a movement that was taking place where God was trying to lead you up to this particular cohort experience to almost offer that same type of training. And we're going to get into the Growing Together Summit for the entire, multi-regions in Australia. And also people even from New Zealand came. We're going to get to that. But I want you to kind of speak into the cohort experience. It was the last leg. You didn't come for the first one. But what was your initial reaction? Because there are some pastors and leaders that are like, what is a cohort? What do we do there? Is that really necessary? Isn't that too expensive? And there's all kinds of different, reactions to what the cohort experience is. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that impressed me so much was just being in a room full of people that were all of the same mind, all wanting to see the local church thrive, all wanting to see younger generations, really find their place and partner with and be mentored. And there was just this sense of unity in the room for wanting to see the local church be all that it could be. But more than that, it wasn't just sitting, listening to lectures all day. The content was fabulous. I was really impressed with the content that was shared. It was inspiring and it was hitting right where it needed to, but it was the opportunity to engage in conversation. And I think the facilitated spaces that were set up for us to talk together, to share ideas, to reflect. At that point, people had been on the journey already, and so there was an opportunity to hear how things were going, what some of the challenges were, what some of the learnings were, and I just think that shared collaboration and listening and being together in that space was exciting, Justin. And I just kept having this thought was, what if we could have this opportunity in Australia? What if we could get a room full of Adventist leaders and local church members together to have this conversation and to not just to attend a lecture or a summit, because we're good at that, those one weekend events, we get together, we're excited, we hear some great stuff, we go back, we forget about it. The thing I loved about the cohort process is that it was more than an event, it is a journey. And it's an ongoing process of culture change, of journeying together, growing, and seeing what the next step is.
Thank you so much for pointing that out. There is something about being in the same table and the room with fired up leaders that really want to transform the local church culture and make it the best place for all generations to grow. Yes. And in your own context of the table that you were sitting and the people that you were talking to, do you actually remember some of the, conversations and some of the things that you guys talked about in that particular cohort experience? Anything that stands out?
I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me is the power of listening, which sounds so simple. And, it's not rocket science about the power of listening. But I just remember some of the leaders at my table sharing how they'd been on the journey for 12 months. and they had committed to a listening journey, a listening project of hearing from the different demographics in their church, and asking intentional questions, and then, from the answers that came from there, starting to piece together a way forward. And I remember, one of the leaders saying, "Oh, I feel like we haven't done a lot. All we've done is listen." But one of the cohort leaders was able to speak into that and say, "That's incredible. That's exactly what we're inviting you to do. This is a slow change, slow journey, and you have just positioned yourselves in the best way possible to be able to move forward with change, because you have a sense of where the heart of the church is at, what some of the longings and losses are, and where to move forward from here." So that idea of listening and taking time really stands out to me.
Yes, that's one of the most powerful aspects of the Growing Young journey, because leadership does begin with listening. And it is the empathetic culture that drives culture change. And it has been most impactful in my ministry too. You mentioned about the Pastor's Summit, then your own experience in cohort, and the almost wholly imaginative question, what if this could take place in Australia, right? So it started with that question. You went back. And here's a preliminary question that I want to ask. So oftentimes, pastors are introduced to this concept or this journey or this resource called Growing Young. It's well received, and it often ends there. I don't know if you kind of resonate with what I'm saying. It's good. They're like, amen. Yes, we need this. And so I want to ask you guys, in your own ministry context of the pastors that you've encountered and talked to and have continued to journey with, after the Pastor Summit, what were some of their feedback afterwards? And when you mentioned or started the question of what if we have it here, what were some of the, I guess, discussion, the content of the discussion?
Yeah, so not long after that, so that was in February, March. There was an upcoming youth engagement summit happening in May of that year, and that was Australia-wide conversation, just talking about this key question actually. And I remember Alina coming back and sharing with me, going, "Well, this will be this is such an incredible time to share on this, we've got to do something, what can we do?" And so, Alina and I put together a really loose presentation, a loose cohort presentation of what could possibly happen. And Alina was, I guess, lucky enough to share at the summit. Hey, do you want to talk into that?
As one of the main general session speakers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that they give you a time frame.
Yes.
You kind of invited yourself
to the summit. Well, I'd just been back from the Pasadena cohort, and I was excited, and here this youth engagement summit had already been scheduled. It was all the youth directors in Australia, all of the presidents, some of the finance teams. So it was a lot of the key stakeholders, but it also included young people as well. There were key young people at the table from each conference. And so
it was intergenerations and tables.
Yes.
That's
so
beautiful.
we were sitting together with, different age groups at these tables, and I was able to present as one of the keynotes. And that was when I was able to share that idea of what would it look like to go on a journey, within our local conferences and potentially Australia. And I know for us in South Queensland, that key conversation there, it didn't stop at the summit. We then went back with our president, with those key young people, and with some other leaders in our church. And the conversation continued to take place after that time, which I think it was just God placing another layer on the conversation to keep the momentum going.
Yes. I think that was almost perfect timing, because that was when you were fully empowered and equipped with the cohort. And then there was it was almost like a preparation for what's to come in the Youth Engagement Summit. So, okay, so there was that keynote. What was the, I guess, response? What was the reaction?
Yeah, so the response was like, we love growing young, we love the principles, great.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like silence, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like on a, I guess, like knocking our heads against a brick wall going, oh God, how do we move this forward? And
Right.
you're trying to engage leadership and that, having hard conversations, but you're just feeling like you're not getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Alina was just like, well, what can we do in our hands? And
absolutely. So I think, we initially had a heart for seeing it go Australia wide. We thought how great would it be to really see this launch? But then God just really directed us to what was right in front of us, and that was our conference. And so we really went back with, while still, connecting with our other youth directors around the country and encouraging them with what they had. We just really, I guess, narrowed our focus down and looked at, our senior leadership, our local churches, our young people that had a heart for it. And so we started the conversations. We started meeting regularly. We started planting seeds. We started using other opportunities and platforms. For example, our camp meeting was a chance I had to speak at camp meeting, which involved all generations. So that was just another chance. So just a lot of seed planting, Justin, and using opportunities to speak into that. At our leadership gatherings for our young adults, we would speak about it. So it was really just looking for the opportunities that God was placing right in front of us and using those to the best that we could.
And then you were in contact with Jake Mulder, one of the authors of Growing Young. Mm-hmm. Did you want to?
Yeah, and so he was going to be in Australia the following year. So a year from the time that I was at the cohort in Pasadena, he was going to be in Australia with another church in Adelaide. And so he offered to come and speak in our conference in Brisbane. And so we took him up on that. So it wasn't a full cohort journey at that time. We just went with, let's just go with a weekend summit to see where it lands from there. And it was incredible.
That's awesome. I think this is an important principle that all of us need to remember. Whichever venture that we want to be on, we got to start where you are with what you have, with the opportunities that God give you. Yeah. And I think the intentional and persistent, almost resilient, almost like a broken record, repeating yourself over and over and over again until it hits home, right?
Yes.
Because I think one of the most inspiring moments that came over me when I think about South Queensland is I listened to that 8-minute video that Martin posted in our network about the president talking about the keychain leadership. And he talked about the different, the two different paintings or the drawings of Adventism. And for an administrator to fully grasp and be a proponent and almost ambassador of growing young and keychaining young leaders, it's an amazing asset to have as you're going through this journey. So can you talk to us a little about how you approach the administration and leadership of your conference? How was that different from approaching and engaging in conversation with the pastors? And how that differ from actually talking with young people? There's almost about 3 different levels of leadership, and how you went about in engaging in those conversations.
So I think what was extremely beneficial is we have an extremely supportive president, and more than just supportive, we have a president who sees the potential in young people and is active in that space. And so he was a part of the journey right from the very beginning. When we had that first pastors summit in South Queensland with Ben, he was the Youth Engagement Summit with us at the table. And, interestingly, from him sitting at the table with 2 young people, those 2 young people ended up being nominated to be on the executive a few months later. So, early 20s. So it just shows what can happen, when we put young people at the table with our senior leadership, and when relationships are formed. Just incredible. So that for us was just a huge win, to see our young people have a voice and to step up. And that's just one example of the type of senior leadership that we're working with. They see the potential, they see the capacity. And so we've always had so much support. And I think as well, Justin, what made a big difference is that this was never viewed as a youth ministry initiative. It was always a team conference initiative partnering with the local church. So there was collaboration at the departmental conference level, but then it was also seen as it has to happen in the local church. It can't be top down. It has to be local empowered, locally owned. But at the same time, there was unity at the top, which I think made a big difference. So from that side of things, it was just those ongoing conversations and collaborating with our other senior leaders. And then you mentioned with the local pastors. I think coming alongside them, Justin, it was an invitation and presenting them with an opportunity as opposed to, you must do this or we're the conference telling you to do this. Yeah. It was coming alongside as a colleague, as a friend.
And I'll jump in there. Like, I think one of the things that younger generations don't necessarily realize is that older generations have a stake in this. And so, like, when you're speaking to pastors and that sort of thing, a lot of them, that's their kids. Like, or that's connected. So it's the conversation is personal. And I think, like, understanding that it is personal means that you've got to come through from that angle. And that was really critical for us. It's like, our president, he had kids in their 20s, so that was important. The pastors, some of their kids weren't no longer in church anymore. So this is something that affects the whole church. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the other key to coming alongside our pastors, Justin, was the way we presented it. It wasn't a new silver bullet solution. It wasn't another program. It wasn't another thing they had to do. It was more of a culture change, a mind shift, an approach that was all-encompassing and could filter through the different layers of some of the things that they were already doing, but being intentional about that, giving it language, giving it focus and strategy, and and inviting key leaders within the church to be a part of that. So I think that's the difference between, because I had one pastor say straight out to me, what's so great about this? How is it different to any other initiative, any other program, that I've been to before? And it was unpacking it to the layers of, this is a journey, this is culture change, this is long term, this is not just an event. And you could see the switch when people started to understand, what was really at the heart of it.
And I think I think a lot of people, when they've tried to tackle this issue, is like, they've tried to throw, a nice program or a silver bullet or whatever, but it isn't like that. It isn't, because it's actually a learning journey. Like, we don't all know the answers of how to navigate this, but why don't we try and navigate it together? And I think that was the incredible thing with this, was it wasn't like pointing the fingers, it was coming alongside.
Totally agree. And I think one of the things that we are not used to is we're always looking for programs instead of wanting to journey together. And the whole concept of journeying together and conversing together and intergenerations collaborating together somehow have become very foreign to us as a church. We do church instead of becoming the church. Wow. Doing church is so much more comfortable than being the church together that's full of messes and conversations. So I love the approach that you actually did with the pastors. And for those of you who are listening, from what I heard, Alina here went to every pastor in her conference. It was a personal visitation and personal dialogue and personal engagement that just really equipped the pastor to say, hey, this is a journey that is open for you and your leadership to take. And man, from the bottom of my heart, I really do appreciate the effort that you have made to make those visitations and those conversations with those pastors. And so, okay, let's go ahead and process forward as you are now gearing up for this summit that's not only conference wide but union and almost division wide. Please take us through the journey that you went through on the different conversations you had and how it all came together.
Absolutely. So when Jake came over that first time, Jake Mulder, and presented for that weekend. So it was a South Queensland initiative, and we had a number of our local churches in the room, a significant portion, and we encouraged them to bring teams. We set it up as much like a cohort as we could, in the sense of having an intergenerational team. But what we also saw the opportunity was for us to invite our sister conferences around the union to send a team if they wanted to. And I think we had about 7 of the 9 conferences in the room that
as well
day.
As New Zealand.
As well, actually, New Zealand had come. We invited them as well. So we had representatives throughout our union, as well as the bulk of the gathering being South Queensland. And I need to give credit and honour to one of my colleagues, Simon Gigliotti, who's the Youth and Young Adult Director down in Sydney.
Simon,
shout out to Simon. After that summit, he's in the Greater Sydney Conference, and he was there with his CFO and a few other key leaders. And
so they brought them up to our Brisbane summit. So which was unbelievable, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. To have such a strategic team from their senior leadership. So they just went back, fired up, and they set in motion a proposal that we had been dreaming and praying over. That was an Australia-wide summit.
Wow. Yeah.
I should say, a cohort journey. So
that was in association with our union youth director, Jeff Parker, and our South Pacific Division youth director, Nick Cross. So,
Nick Cross,
It was a collaborative effort from there, Justin. So what started as a South Queensland summit with a few invited guests actually became the launch pad for a union-wide and division-supported initiative that then rolled out the following year, which is now 2020.
Wow. So everything began with invitation. I want to actually key in on that. Whenever you're trying to do anything, I guess, noble, valuable, causeworthy, it's very important for you to invite. What if you didn't invite your sister conferences? What if the invitation wasn't extended? You know, there's a scope and I guess a big picture that God had in mind. And for any of us that are listening, whether it's your local church, don't try to do this on your own. Whether it's your district, whether it's your region, continue to invite others into your journey, and make that possible for everyone. Okay, so as you are like approaching the date for this summit, and I want to build this thing up because it's amazing. Because like, how many churches showed up? Like the representation.
So across Australia we have just under 100 across Australia and New Zealand. Okay.
And all those church leaders gather in different parts of Australia, from what I understand, and they all underwent the mini cohort experience.
Yeah.
And can you tell us of what the response was? Like, what was their feedback?
Yeah, so we've got churches from all the way from country sort of churches to city churches to ethnic churches, multicultural churches, and I guess the response was like almost a fresh of breath air, in the sense that this conversation was actually happening, and it was for many churches, like, I think they talk about it around the dinner table at family homes, the frustrations and whatever. But here it was just like, it was a new thing. It was just incredible. And people were, really resonated with this new idea, this new paradigm, and a new way of, I guess, journeying with, and not necessarily having all the answers there and then. I think that's a really foreign concept for many people, is just like this idea. So I think, people were really resonated from it.
Absolutely. And I think as well, like whilst it is a new approach, at the same time, it's like the oldest thing in the world. It's a Jesus-centered community. It's how the church started. And so I think for a lot of our churches, you know, that might have been a little bit uncertain or, you know, what is this new thing that we're doing? Really, it was a call back to the heart of who our church is. And, you know, that's where Brett presented on, you know, those, you know, 2 pictures of Adventism. Who we are as an Adventist church is a church that is intergenerational and that empowers young people. And so in some ways, while it was a call to move forward, it was also a call to return to our roots and to return to the church, how God always intended it. And I think just seeing those light bulbs go on, again, just having a room full of like-minded people, sharing that passion, and for it to be happening in 4 key strategic locations around Australia over a 2-weekend period.
So that's probably wasn't picked up. So it was like we had it in 4 different cities, this summit. So it was pretty incredible to have it all happening simultaneously.
Yeah. So again, that sense of just we're journeying this as a conference, well, as a local church first and foremost, but as a conference, but then also, you know, nationwide. And then we had one church from New Zealand, which can now say it's division-wide. But they were pioneers in themselves, you know, coming over from another country to be a part of this. So that to me is a sign of the Holy Spirit moving and convicting hearts.
Most definitely. We are finally beginning to realize almost globally, and I don't mean that slightly, that we're all family. We're on this together. We're not in our own quarantined experiences doing our thing. Oh, we becoming the most cutting edge or most innovative church or conference. It's no longer about that anymore. It's all about us journeying to become the best church together.
Yes.
I love that vision of being a body of Christ where all generations flourish. And I think each corner of the globe, God is raising up churches and leaders and people that are beginning to recognize this is who we are.
Yes.
We are intergenerational church that needs to collaborate and empower each other, right? And I sense so much excitement the way you talk about it. Like, I don't know if other people notice and sense it, but there's so much passion that just oozes out of Alina and Martin where they just talk about these things that are happening in their midst. So one thing that I want to kind of, you know, as we are wrapping up our session together, if you could talk to any senior leader or pastor of a local church that are on the brink of, okay, we need to do something different for our church, especially going through this pandemic. We can't go back to our churches and do the same thing over again, expecting different results. As they're contemplating different options of how they can go about in doing something that's different, what would you tell them?
Yeah, well, I mean, this pandemic has probably given us a window of, like, I think there's many people who look at this pandemic in the sense that, we need to just buckle down and just wait this out and it's just going to return back to normal. Well, we've got to, maybe it will go back to normal. But, you know, the likelihood is that we might be seeing a completely different way of the world as well as how we do church. So I think that we can't brush that question aside, and we've got to, like, I guess, go on a learning journey or posing the questions of, okay, if some of these things is going to continue, how do we function as a church, an intergenerational church, a growing young church, in this new paradigm? Like, and I don't think this is a question we should just leave to the side and say, oh, it's okay, the restrictions are easing right now. We've got to start tackling this issue. Hey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this disruption that we've had has forced us to look beyond the building, to look beyond the programs, and see the essence of who we truly are, you know, as God's people, and the value of authentic community, the value of being disciples who make disciples, of that connection that goes beyond the weekend service, that actually is about making a difference in our neighborhoods and in our communities. And I think it's a space where we can't necessarily do a lot, but we can have some very key conversations and we can still be strategic. And I've loved the way, some of the conversations we've had with our pastors and leaders is it's been an opportunity for our young people to shine. Our young people love to be innovative and creative, and just seeing them, really thrive in this season with trying new ways of connecting.
They're the natives of this new world. And so, we've got to really bring them at the seat of the table if we're going to have even a window of what this new world looks like. Okay?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
There's a whole new normal, a new horizon, and a new chapter that is beyond us. And for such a time as this, we do have, I don't want to really call this a resource, but this is definitely an opportunity for every church to step up their game and rise and begin to engage in conversations that are very difficult to handle. I want to actually pull up this quote by Ishan Neo, a 21-year-old that went to this summit. Growing Together Summit was so inspiring to see so many leaders from across Australia being intentional about investing in young people. It gives me so much hope for the future of the church, for my friends and me, and for the next generations coming after us. It's infusing hope into the next generation to see leaders gathering and engaging in conversations that are critical for such a time as this.
Yeah.
And I know that you guys had a lot of maybe follow-up plans on how it would all play out after the summit, and this disruption, this coronavirus came into play. So as one of our last questions that I'm going to probably present to you guys is, it looks like you have embraced it, you have welcomed it. This is a disruption that you are willing to journey through. How are you, advising and counseling the church leaders in this particular pandemic, and also in the aftermath of the pandemic? How are you? What's the conversation that's going on between you and the church leaders?
Well, we've been really blessed to have a lot of those conversations quite recently. We're in the phase of our Growing Together cohort, where our coaches are meeting up with our different teams. And just last week, meeting with a number of teams on Zoom. It seems to be the platform of choice these days. We're all Zooming around together, but just being on that platform, having our senior leaders, some young people from all different generations, and hearing their journey. I think one thing that we've been able to really speak into is the fact that despite what has happened with the pandemic, this is still a journey that we can do. That's the beauty of it. If it was an initiative or an event, the pandemic would have ruined it. But because this is a journey about listening, we've really encouraged our teams to keep building their team, to keep looking for strategic people to invite into the conversation. Some of our teams have really gone ahead and done that over the last couple of months. Others are still on that journey and process of praying through who do we need to invite into the conversation. And the other thing is really leaning into the listening project. Using it as an opportunity to have conversations with the younger generations and the older generations in our church. And one example came up of one of the leaders in the Growing Together team. He thought, well, I'll just start with my own family. I'll start with my own kids. And he has a couple of young adult children. Yes. And so he asked them some of these key questions about, what are they seeing in church, and what are some of the joys, what are the challenges? And the young lady, she was on the call as well with her dad, and she was like, I'd never had my dad ask me that before. I'd never been given opportunity to speak honestly and frankly about how I see our church at the moment.
And what did she say? She said, Dad, are you sure you want to know? Are you sure?
Man.
And they had a really beautiful conversation, and
it was hard. It was a hard
conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
Because he thought that he was doing like all these things, but he didn't know how it was affecting her or anything like that. So it was just incredible just to hearing those the parent and daughter just like journeying with on on this situation, hey?
Absolutely. And so that for us gave an example, like we were able to speak to our other teams and say, just start with what is right in your hand. And we spoke about that earlier. Maybe it is some of your family members. Maybe it's your niece or your nephew or your son or daughter. Maybe it's some of the young people in your youth or young adult group you already got a relationship with. So just encouraging them to lean into that space and to see that, it's not about running the events and programs, and the journey will still continue and can be intentional in this space.
And I think particularly in this time, like when people are like doing live streaming, and maybe there is some Sabbath schools that are still meeting online, I guess the question is, who isn't in the room? Like, we're seeing like the marginalized that aren't necessarily connecting, necessarily. And so I guess, who's missing, and can we actually listen out, hear their stories? Like, that's really critical right now. So,
That's a very good question. Who is missing from the conversation? Who can we invite? And I love the story of the growing together journey of a family. Many young adults are actually back at home, the collegiates. And 20-somethings are back at home, coexisting, cohabitating with their parents. Some of the struggle is real for some people. And as you just talked about, there are some really tough and hard conversations that we have been avoiding for many, many years. It's long overdue. And I think some of those conversations are taking place. And I think that's the catalyst for change that we need to utilize. Those conversations and listening sessions. All right. This has been super rich, so valuable. So for those listeners and who wants to connect with you guys and hear more of your story, where can they find you online, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if the screen is displayed for other people, it's just Martin van Rensburg, Alina van Rensburg on Instagram. We're both on Facebook as well with the same names. So flick us a message, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you and connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think we need to enter into another dialogue where we need to enter into partnership with the Texas Conference and South Queensland Conference and really begin to work together on the growing together journey. I believe in partnership and collaboration. I believe we need to do this together. And I think in the future, whatever God has in store, I know that we can journey together in that regard and respect. And all of our blessings and prayers for the upcoming follow-up and aftermath of the amazing summit that took place. May God continue to bless both of you as you journey with him and journey into the future with your churches and young adults that God has entrusted you for such a time as this. Thank you so much. And let me go ahead and pray for you guys. Let's go ahead and pray for you, and then we'll wrap up our time together. Heavenly Father God, thank you so much for Alina and Martin and for their dedication and commitment and their passion to really raise up local churches to be all that they can be and they were created to be. And as they have embarked upon this process and are journeying together with some really amazing leaders and also young adults and next generation, continue to grant them heavenly wisdom, discretion, discernment, counsel, and advice that they need on any given basis. And as they enter into dialogue and conversation about what's next and into the next chapter that's awaiting them, we pray that you will lead them step by step and continue to show them that you are the one that's in charge, Lord. You are fully in control. You are on your throne. And you know exactly what's happening next. And all the uncertainties and anxieties that we might have, help us to put our trust in you and know that you will lead us into the future that you have designed for us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks, Republic of Texas. It's been fun.
Thank you.
It's been so fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Justin. You're a legend.
All right.